Hey everyone, welcome back. I gotta say, it's really good to be back here with you all.
It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us.
Absolutely.
As some of you may know, I had a bit of a run-in with an e-scooter a while back, and let's just say I've logged a lot more couch time than scooting time lately.
Oh, yeah, I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, so it got me thinking about, e-scooters that were everywhere these days, but how much do we really know about staying safe on these things?
Good question. And it's something that's becoming more and more relevant as e-scooters become a bigger part of our lives.
Totally. And that's why I'm so glad we're doing this deep dive today.
Me too.
So we're moving beyond my little accident and diving into some really interesting research. We're talking about this study by Pei and Doza
Yes.
out of Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. And they really took a close look at all the things that can make an e-scooter ride a little too exciting, if you know what I mean. We're ditching those, those like simulations and hypothetical situations and like going straight to the streets with this one.
Yeah. And they went all out for this study. I mean, we're talking almost 4,700 riders, almost 7,000 trips.
Wow.
Over 9,930 kilometers. That's like scooting from New York to LA and back again.
That's a lot of scooting.
It is. And here's the really cool part. They didn't just track basic things like where people were going and how fast.
Okay.
They used these things called instrumented rental e-scooters.
Okay, so are we talking like e-scooters with PhDs now, or?
Basically.
Yeah.
Imagine an e-scooter that's like a rolling research lab, right? These things were decked out with sensors that tracked everything, their speed, how much they were tilting.
Wow. It's like big data meets micromobility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a gold mine for researchers because they get to see how people are really riding out there in the wild, not just in some controlled lab setting.
Okay, so it's like having a little black box for e-scooters.
Exactly.
Revealing all our riding habits, the good, the bad, and the
wobbly.
Before we get into like all the nitty gritty, let's define what we even mean by like a crash and near crash in the context of e-scooters. Because I mean, these things handle a bit differently than your average car.
You're right. It's a bit more nuanced.
Right.
So they defined a crash as any unintended contact with another object. Could be a car, a curb, another e-scooter.
Okay.
A rider falling off while the scooter's moving. That's definitely a crash.
Yeah, those spills can be brutal.
They can be rough.
So what constitutes a near crash then in this like e-scooter jungle?
Okay, so think of a near crash as a close call. A situation where the rider or someone nearby had to like react quickly to avoid a collision. Slamming on the brakes, maybe swerving out of the way, anything that gets your heart racing a little bit.
Oh, yeah, those like, ooh, moments. Okay,
Yeah.
So those moments where you like narrowly avoid disaster. Now, this next part surprised me. The researchers actually had to account for intentional crashes.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling, but it's true. We're talking about instances where someone just deliberately drives an e-scooter into a wall or another object. It's a real thing. So they had to kind of factor that in.
Wow, that's shocking. I mean, you'd think people would treat these things with a bit more respect, especially since they're rentals. It's not like, your own vehicle. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think it just highlights how, human behavior can change a little when we're dealing with like shared property versus something we own.
For sure.
There's a sense of anonymity, maybe a little less personal responsibility, and that comes into play. And I mean, it's a fascinating aspect of human behavior, and it goes way beyond e-scooters, really.
You've officially got me hooked. Hit me with the highlights. What did they find out? Okay, so spill the beans. What were those eye-opening findings?
Well, one of the biggies, and this one really hits home given, your accident, like how much experience you have on an e-scooter really makes a difference. Turns out those first few rides,
right,
that's when you're most likely to eat it, according to this study at least.
Yeah. Riders with 5 or fewer trips under their belt were twice as likely to end up in an accident. Okay, yeah, that tracks with my personal experience. I definitely remember like those first couple of rides thinking, oh, this is easy, I've got this. And then, you hit a patch of gravel or a rogue squirrel decides to cross your path and suddenly.
Right, it all goes out the window.
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget or to not even realize in the first place how much skill is actually involved.
Totally.
It's not just like knowing the rules of the road, right? It's about those split-second reactions, knowing how the scooter handles in different situations, being able to brake smoothly, anticipating obstacles. All that takes practice.
Yeah, for sure. Practice makes perfect.
Exactly. Now, moving on to the types of trips people were taking.
Okay.
Would you guess, like just off the top of your head, that a leisurely e-scooter cruise is riskier than, like zipping through traffic on your way to work.
Honestly, I would assume like the commuter who's battling rush hour would be at higher risk.
Right.
But I'm ready to be surprised.
Well, get ready to be surprised because this study actually found that riders on leisure trips, they had a higher risk of safety-critical events.
Really?
Those carefree joyrides, it seems, might be more dangerous than the daily grind.
Interesting. So enjoying the scenery comes with its own set of risks. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, think about it. When you're on a leisurely ride, you might be more relaxed. You're probably less focused on the traffic around you and perhaps more inclined to, kind of soak in the sights
Or grab a coffee, on the go.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And to figure out who was on a coffee run versus a commute, the researchers cleverly analyzed something called the directness factor. And basically what this measures is how much a rider zigzags.
Oh, okay.
So like a lower directness factor suggests a more leisurely kind of meandering route, which, as it turns out, was associated with more problems.
Interesting. So like taking the scenic route might come with a hidden cost, but how did they differentiate between someone who's choosing a longer route, like for fun, and someone who's getting lost on their way to the office?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's really where their data analysis shined. They factored in the starting and ending points of the trip, time of day of the week, and even points of interest.
Oh, wow.
Like, were they going by transit stations, restaurants, schools? So they weren't just looking at, how squiggly the lines on the map were. They were painting this like really complete picture of the rider's journey.
Okay, that's seriously impressive. It's like they thought of everything.
They did. They really did. Okay, ready for another one?
Hit me.
All right, so this one might be a little uncomfortable, especially given your accident.
What is it?
Remember those sensors on the e-scooters? The ones tracking everything? Well, they noticed a pretty big difference in accident risk, depending on how many hands were on the handlebars.
Oh, no.
Yeah, about that.
I may or may not have, on occasion, attempted a sip of water while riding one-handed.
So it turns out riding one-handed makes you way more likely to crash.
Like, how much more likely?
We're talking 6 times more likely.
6 times? You're kidding. 6 times. Okay, that's officially making me cringe.
Huh.
I mean, I get it. Sometimes you need to adjust your bag or scratch your nose, but that big of a difference.
It really highlights the difference between e-scooters and bikes. Bicycles are designed for stability, even with a little wobble here and there. E-scooters, not so much. They need those 2 hands on the handlebars to stay upright, especially when things get bumpy or when pigeons decide to get involved.
Okay, 2 hands. Lesson learned. What about everyone's favorite distraction, using your phone while riding? We've all seen it, but did the study actually find a link to accidents?
Oh, absolutely. Unsurprisingly, phone use while riding was a recipe for, not paying attention. And often it's not just the phone itself, right? It's the one-handed riding while scrolling through Instagram or whatever's happening on the screen.
Talk about a recipe for disaster. It's like those warnings on medicine bottles. Do not operate heavy machinery while using this medication. Maybe e-scooter companies should start adding those warnings to the handlebars.
Right.
Okay, here's one I hadn't actually considered before. Pack riding. So, like, is cruising around with your little e-scooter gang, is that really that dangerous?
It might seem harmless enough, but the study actually found that riding in a group, it increased the risk of those like close calls. And researchers believe this could be due to something called target fixation.
Target fixation. Okay, I'm not familiar with that term.
So target fixation is this phenomenon where you become so focused on the person or object that's directly in front of you that you fail to notice, kind of like other hazards or changes in your peripheral vision. So in the context of e-scooter riding, you might be so busy, keeping up with your friends that you don't see that pothole or that car turning into your path.
Right. You're so caught up in the social aspect of it that your awareness of your surroundings just takes a hit.
Exactly. And when you're riding in a pack, you also have less space to maneuver, right? If someone suddenly brakes or swerves in front of you.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's best to stick to solo rides, or at the very least, keep a very safe distance from your e-scooter buddies.
That's the safest approach. Now, let's move on to a finding that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. The study found that riders with lower average speeds were actually more likely to experience a safety-critical event.
Wait, really? You would think going slower would be safer. What's going on there?
It does seem a little backwards. But remember our earlier discussion about, less experienced riders being more prone to crashes? Well, it turns out those newer riders, they also tend to ride at slower speeds. since they're still, kind of getting comfortable with handling the e-scooter.
Ah, so it's not that, like, going slower inherently causes crashes. It's just that less experienced riders who are statistically more likely to crash also happen to ride at slower speeds.
Exactly. It's a classic example of correlation not equaling causation.
Right, right. That makes a lot more sense. So much for my theory that e-scooter safety is just about mastering the art of not running over your own toes. This has been a serious eye-opener. But we haven't talked about solutions yet. What can we do with all this information? It feels like there are takeaways here for everyone. Cities, e-scooter companies, riders.
Absolutely. The researchers actually offered some concrete suggestions. One big one is ramping up rider education. And I'm not just talking about those basic follow the rules PSAs. They're suggesting hands-on skills training, especially for newbies, to help them develop those crucial riding instincts we talked about.
Like e-scooter driving school, I'd sign up for that.
Right. They also talked about using tech to make safer riding a no-brainer. Imagine phone apps or onboard sensors that can sense when someone's riding one-handed or trying to text and drive. Ear, scoose, and then give them a little nudge or even limit their speed.
Okay, I love that it's like your phone is your own personal safety squad. And then, of course, there's the whole city planning aspect, designing streets with e-scooters in mind.
Exactly. Dedicated lanes, smoother surfaces, all of that can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
So it's really a collaborative effort, right? Cities, companies, and riders all working together to make e-scooting as safe as it is, fun and convenient.
Couldn't agree more. All right, listeners, it's time for us to hop off our metaphorical e-scooters. But before we do, let's bring it back to you. How has this deep dive shifted your thinking about e-scooter safety? What personal green lights or red flags will you be paying attention to on your next ride?
It's so easy to get caught up in the thrill of the ride. But as with any mode of transportation, safety should always be front and center.
Well said. And a huge thanks to Pei and Dodza for their incredible research. Who knew e-scooter data could be so fascinating? Until next time, everyone, ride safe, ride smart, and keep those wheels turning.